brief explanation of how to access the deck here on the truck. We have a rather unique situation in that we have a ladder here that also serves as a gate to the deck. Here's the latch on that. You simply raise this thing up, jerk the door open. Once you swing it open, there is a latch up here that you flip down to keep the ladder from swinging on you. Come around to the other side, place your outside leg on the bottom step, simply climb up the ladder, step on the deck. You want to release this stop here, bring the door around, raise the handle, and you're safely in here. To release the door, open the door, raise it up. This one wants to stick just a little. Latch it in place. Step out with your outside leg. Simply climb down the ladder. And there you go. One thing keep in mind on this, when we were building this truck or this body, we tried to get the bottom step as low to the ground as we could, but we had to keep in mind clearance on the truck. So you've got a pretty good step stepping up on that. So going up or coming down, don't be skipping any of the steps. We talked earlier about the control panel or pump panel and the deck up here, so we want to point out several of the features up here on the deck. First thing let's just start right here behind the cab and look at some things. We do have a storage basket here. It's made out of expanded metal that you can store about anything in it. Right now we have a couple of spotlights in it here, but beside the storage bin we have a post that we store our safety cones on. It's simply a post that sticks up, it's welded on the bottom. All you have to do is just drop the safety cones on it and it will hold them in place. This is the intercom that allows the pump panel operator or those firemen operating here on the deck to talk to the driver. He has a unit up on the dash just like this. You can talk back and forth. It has a handset on it just like your two-way radio. You simply mash the button and you can talk to the driver. Let's turn around now and look at one of the more important parts of this truck. This is the water storage tank on the truck. It holds 1,100 gallons. It's a stainless tank. It was built by Watkins Fabrication up at Mineral Wells. Has two manholes on it where you can get down in the tank if you should need to get down in it. This tank is baffled so that you don't get a lot of wash back and forth and front to back in your tank. There are baffles that run the length of the tank, and then there are baffles that run across the tank. So that cuts down on instability in your tank where your water would get to washing back and forth. We mentioned earlier when we were on the ground about the storage bins on this side. We have about 400 feet of field line, 2.5-inch field line over here on this side. There's 14-foot roof ladder. Here's some pipe poles and other tools stored down here. This is our whip line for the passenger side of the vehicle. We have them strapped together. This is about a 5-inch whip line. This is swiveled so that the fireman operating on this side can take this whip line, swivel it around. This door would be, or gate would be closed. So we can pull that line around and it can lean over the side and hit a fire if you're running alongside a fire. Now these whip lines, you're going to have enough pressure on them that you can probably reach out 25, maybe 30 feet with that. So they're going to be a lot stronger lines with a lot more pressure than you normally get off your red lines on your brush trucks. But when we come back around, we find that there's a valve that controls your pressure, and what you'll learn to do, or need to learn to do, is buffer that pressure with this valve. If you leave the valve wide open, you may be getting 100, 120 pounds of pressure on that line, so it may make it rather difficult to hold, and part of the time you may not need that much pressure on the line because you may not need to reach out that far. Here on the left side of the panel we have a 12-volt outlet receptacle. Here is a switch for our panel lights. There's 4 panel lights here that light up this panel. Next to that is a switch for our work lights that we pointed out when we walked around the truck. And each of these valves, each of these valves controls a water outlet. They each have their own pressure gauge, so you can see how much pressure is on any particular line at any one time. We'll just move across the pump panel here, and I can point out the controls for each of the lines. This first one here is the blue pre-connect on the back, the 200-foot 1.5-inch line. This is where the pressure to it would be controlled. This is for the red line back on the back. I'm sorry, not the red line on the reel, but the red line in the hose bed back there, the pre-connect, the 1.5 inch. This is where the control is for it. This is the main valve for the side discharges. Although each of them has a separate valve on them, this is where you would charge that line. When you open this valve, then both of those side discharges have pressure on them. This is the valve for the hose reel. You do not have any water in your red line on your hose reel until you open this valve. This is the valve handle for the pump return. For the pump return, I'm sorry. This valve will stay open unless we have a situation where we need to be able to pump the maximum water at maximum pressure, and your pump panel operator might close this valve. It would be a rarity for him to do that. All the pumps on all of our trucks have a tank return. That's to keep the pump from pressuring up and blowing a seal out of it. So this would normally stay open, and it's under the total control of the pump panel operator. The next valve is for the front sweep nozzles. They have electric valves up front, but this is the one that charges the line to those sweep nozzles. And then this would be the control or the valve for your sweep line on the driver's side. And I'm sorry, let me back up. This is the control for the whip line, this one right here. It's identical to the one over on the passenger side. Has about the same length hose as the one on the passenger side, and it's also on a swivel. But here's where you would control the pressure to that whip line and buffer that pressure if you needed to. There are a few switches here we need to look at. As we mentioned earlier, and we'll point out in the cab video, there is a switch up front for the PTO. And simply what that does is enable the PTO. The driver of the truck has to have the engine idle down before he engages that, and then it's under the control of the pump panel operator. He simply flips this switch on, the PTO kicks in, and the pump starts to pump. The next switch we have here is the high idle switch for the engine. It's in parallel with an identical switch on the dash up there, but if we're in a stationary pumping situation in a structure fire, the pump panel operator is going to hit this switch. It will idle the engine up to about 15 or 1600 RPMs, which is just about ideal pumping RPM for a pump. So when he decides to idle it back down, all he has to do is hit that switch again and it idles the engine down. Here's the tank gauge, identical to the one on the back that we pointed out back by the fill point on the truck, the tank fill point. It's identical to the one back there. The next switch here, you have a switch on either side of this gauge here at the front sweep nozzles. These switches activate the valves on the front of the truck for the sweeps. You have a left and a right. Now, one thing I would point out, when you flip one of these switches on, that valve is not instantaneous. It takes about 8 seconds for that valve to open. But these are the ones that control the valves on the front of the truck. And then, well, that's all the switches we have. But one thing I want to show you too is we have some items here in this bin. We talked about the 2-inch transfer pump that's down below us here. This is a suction line for it. We also have another whip line here. This whip line is about 3 feet longer than either of these. Now what this allows us to do, if we're running along a heavy fire line and trying to knock it down, we'll have our sweep nozzle on. We'll be using a whip line on the driver's side. We'll hook up this longer whip line on this side and we can pull it over so that we have 2 whip lines operating on the same side of the truck. That gives us a tremendous amount of knockdown power if you're running alongside a fire line. Also here we have a penetrating nozzle. It looks like a long spear you hook to 1.5 inch line, and that tight nozzle, you could punch it through the side of a house or through the window or something and get water into the house that way. Also, up here, the only other thing we have is a litter. In case we have a fireman go down, we have a way of using that litter to pick him up. The last thing I think I want to point out here, for those up here on the deck, for short distances of transport, we do have drop-down seats here that they can sit down on, or simply if you need to get off your feet a little bit and rest, we do have these drop-down benches. There's one on this side and one on the other side. You can easily seat 4 people here. Normally, we wouldn't have people sitting back here during transport. This would only be for short distances.